Hi, welcome back to the channel. Last week, I did a video on the challenges of retiring before 60 in Canada, and I made a big misstep in that video. Now, when I'm filming, I script out the meat of the video and the main points I'm trying to make, but I rarely script out the intro. And in that intro, one thing I'm definitely guilty of is when I'm not scripted, I do tend to exaggerate. And I flippantly said you need $2 to $3 million to retire in your 50s. And that's simply not true. And I shouldn't have said it. It was an exaggeration. What I want to do in this video is go into a case study. I have a case study designed here for retiring at 55 to show that it's absolutely possible to retire at 55 with less than $2 or $3 million. But I do want to go a little bit more in depth into why there are challenges with that. So that's what today is all about. Let's get started. All right, so I have three projections here, all from Snap Projection. And because I'm a super original guy, the couple's name is Chad and Chadette Sample, and they live here in Manitoba with me. The first projection, which we'll go through, is that they retire at 55. The next is that they retire at 55 with a stress test, which is one of the points I didn't go into in the last video, but we're going to talk about a little bit here. And then there's retire at 55 with the stress test, but they work a different job to 60. Okay. And so for whatever reason, this first one has the reports out of order. So I'm just going to skip around here a little bit. So I apologize in advance. So let's just go into who Chad and Chadette are on paper. So I'm going to skip here. Net worth details. So in this case, what I did was that they have both their TFSAs maxed out at 100,000. They both have either $500,000 or $400,000 respectively in RSPs, meaning they have $1.1 million of investable assets. They own a home here in Manitoba for $600,000 free and clear, total net worth of $1.7 million. Nowhere near the $2 to $3 million of assets that I said in that video by mistake. If I come up here, there's also a summary of the assumptions. Here are lots of the assumptions I use on a pretty regular basis. FP Canada, or Financial Planning and Standards Council, recommends that we use 2.1% inflation. I like to be conservative, so I set it to 2.5. Sometimes I even change it to 3, kind of depending on the client situation. For investment returns, I assume 1% cash, 2.5 fixed income, and 5 equity. This is very conservative. My objective is with the software is if it works in here, I know it will work in real life because I'm so conservative in my investment expectations. FP Canada actually suggests this should be more like 6.5, but they don't factor in fees. And again, I like to be conservative. Both of the people in the couple are 55 years old. In this case, because it's just a sample, they both start CPP at 65, OAS at 65. Because they're hoping to retire at 55, I assume they made a little bit more than the average income earner in Canada. So I have their CPP set to 75, not the national average, which is about 56%. And I assume 100% OAS. They've lived in Canada all their lives. And I assume that they have a mix of 40% fixed income and 60% equities in all of their investments. So they're getting 4% investment return. So if we look, we see their cash flow here. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to mention this. I have it assumed that they're spending $5,500 per month. I find that my average client that comes to me is usually looking to spend somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 a month after taxes, of course. And so I just split the difference at $5,500 and came out with $66,000 per year. So this is that inflating along the way. We also have my favorite chart, which is my cash inflow chart. The reason I love this chart so much is because it color codes my favorite analogy, which is the foundational, structural, and finishing income. So we have the two blues there that represent OAS and CPP. Those are foundational income sources. They are not linked to a market. They are reliable. That's the first step in really building your financial income house in retirement. And here's one of the points I did go into for why it's so difficult to retire in your 50s if you choose to. And it's because you have no access to foundational income. And again, in this case, I'm assuming there's no defined benefit pension. That was part of the conversation from last week. So no defined benefit. pension, which would be foundational, no access to CPP in your 50s, no access to OAS in your 50s, no access to GIS in your 50s. You have nothing here that could provide you income for a number of years, for the first 5 years in this case, that is not correlated with some form of market. Meaning that if you happen to retire at 55 and at 57 there happens to be a massive market downturn, you are incredibly vulnerable and you're exposed, which is what this report with the stress test is all about. We'll get to that later. Anyways, beyond the blue, we have the two different greens, which is your RSP and TFSA, which is structural and finishing income. Then we get to the net worth projection. And here's where I do set one expectation incredibly conservatively. I always set real estate, which is the dark blue here, to 0% appreciation. I know that's not true. I know that your homes will, over a long-term time period, increase in value, or at least I believe that very strongly. But even if I put that at 2% on $600,000, after 30 years, it grows to a pretty astronomical number. And I find that it skews the report and makes it just a little bit harder to read. So I make the choice to set appreciation at 0, unless we're talking very specifically about selling a home within 5 to 10 years, then I kind of compensate for that. But that's one of the things that I do. So you'll see here that their net worth declines a little bit. Then around 65, in comes CPP and OAS, so it slows that decline a little bit. And then around age 85, you start to need a little bit of debt to actually make ends meet. We have loads of equity in the home, so this shouldn't be a problem, should be easy to access. And for me, quite frankly, if I saw shortfalls starting at 85 on a baseline projection without looking at CPP timing, OAS timing, or withdrawal order, I would say this is going to be fine. I can make tweaks and recommendations that will get rid of all of that debt. It shouldn't be a big issue. Here we have the net worth projection, which I'm going to come back to once we've gone through the other ones a little bit. And then finally, we have the estate details. So combined, 2059, so I have them passing away at age 90. They have the real estate worth 600 grand, debt of just over $250,000, meaning the actual estate is 340 grand in future dollars and 143,000 in today's dollars. So very doable, a little bit of debt. I know with a few tweaks, I could get rid of that debt altogether. All right, so let's look at the exact same scenario, but with a stress test. So what we can do in Snap Projections is we can bring in real data. So some software has what's called a Monte Carlo analysis, where it runs the same scenario 1,000 times and tells you a likelihood of it working. Snap doesn't do that. I brought that to them. I think it'll be something they add probably this year. But what we can do is we can bring in real data, and I can isolate data. So I can say, show me the worst 10-year period that we have seen. And their data set goes back to 1965. So that data happens to be 1965 through 1975. And it brings in real data and real returns that this particular asset mix would have had in that time. So there are years in here where your returns are huge and inflation is manageable. There are years in here where inflation is huge and returns are horrible, and then it repeats that same 10 years over and over and over again. And I like to stress test my plans because it shows where there's vulnerabilities or how vulnerable someone is to a rough market condition. I have no expectation that the markets will ever be that bad for that long, but it's a good exercise for expecting the absolute worst. And even here, you can see the historical data starts at 1965, goes through 1975. Average inflation in that time period was 4.91. These are the different investment returns. That is really hard for me to comprehend on how cash could outperform equity over that long time period, but here we are. So now, same net worth, everything like that. Cash flow does the same type of thing. Cash inflow does the same type of thing, but now the debt starts way, way sooner, 75 years old. So before it was 85, I could tweak my way out of that with 3-4 different adjustments. Maybe you work one extra year, you'd be fine. In this case, because we're so vulnerable in these years in particular, the shortfalls start at 75. And if I go out to the estate projection, it's $3.5 million of debt required to make this work now. Now, again, financial planning software is not perfect, right? In the original case, the returns were perfect every year. Inflation was perfect every year. We could expect them perfectly. That will never happen. And in this case, it's an absolute horror show, but you continue to spend, or Chad and Chadette continue to spend at the $5,500 per month with like just blindly, right? That's also not true to life. So this is again a little bit exaggerated, but it shows the power of that kind of vulnerability. And then finally, I have a copy of that scenario, the retire at 55 with the stress test. But then I have Chad and Chadette working until 60 in a different job. It's a lower stress job. I went to Ernst & Young has a really great website where you can figure out exactly what you'd be making net based on every province. So I figured out that $40,000 a year each would accommodate for their $66,000 of spending. There wouldn't be any investing. They'd have to touch their investments just a little bit in those first 5 years, but really it protects the investments over that time. Nothing else has changed. And I go down here and now it's pushed from 75 to 81 is when shortfalls start to happen. So again, I'm already becoming more comfortable. This is what I was really saying in that video last week, that you're just so vulnerable in your 50s, especially like 55 or early 50s, because you have no access to foundational income. And if you allow yourself to just protect your assets for those 5 years, you can really make a big impact on pushing shortfalls out. Now let's look at an actual net worth here. So let's go originally to the first plan, perfect returns, perfect inflation, everything's predictable. That will never happen. Net worth at age 80, I'm picking 80 as a random figure, $835,000. 600 of that is the real estate. The stress test, age 80, diminishes that significantly. It's negative $200,000 because you have $800,000 of debt. It's $1 million swing, give or take, based on just the market conditions. We look here to when you work those extra 5 years, not to invest, but simply just to protect your assets for those 5 years. Now the net worth is $700,000. Again, majority of that's in the real estate. It's almost brought us back to here, right? Now we're in the horror show of a market condition, but you protected your assets for those extra 5 years, and we're within $130,000 of the original projection for that net worth. All right, so is retiring before age 60 with less than 2 to 3 million, like I said last week, possible? Absolutely. 100% it is possible. Now, spending expectation will be a huge part of it as well. 5,500 may be a lot to you, and that would make a big difference to make it even a little bit easier. I did not incorporate things like go, slow go, no go into there because, again, I'm just trying to illustrate the point that I was attempting to make, but went at it really poorly last week. But is it possible? Absolutely. Is it easy? No. And again, the big reason why I think that it's not easy is just that vulnerability that you have in those first, in particular, 5 years when you have no access to anything foundational. So if it's time for you to look at your financial situation and you're looking to retire in your 50s or your 60s or whatever it is, it might be time for your financial plan. There's a link in the description below that'll come directly to me. And until next time, keep planning.